It is a confusing path, hard to follow without a thread. But, provided you are not devoured at the midpoint, it leads surely, despite its twists and turns, back to the beginning.
The program you are about to hear is fiction. Science fiction. We make no guarantees, however, how long it will remain fiction. Fiction. Fiction.
Welcome back to Exofathom Cognodox. My name is Mike, and I totally missed the salutations. It was all that great work. It was
great. No, rewind. Woodblock. Do.
a rare miss for me. There's symmetrical salutations.
So good.
Yeah, how y'all doing on this Monday?
Hey, happy Monday. Doing all right. How are you?
The Packers lost. Getting over COVID. Yeah, very sad. That was a heartbreaker. So I'm doing it as no, it's COVID.
Football.
It's football. God damn Packers. But yeah, no, hanging in there.
That's
How
good.
about you, Ayla? How you doing?
Just another manic Monday, man.
Oh, manic panic.
Manic panic. Yeah. I mean, if you've listened to the time podcasts that we've recorded, I now know time does not exist. So it's weird to think about Mondays and days in general. They're all made up.
Yeah, it's like whose line is it anyways, right? It's all made up. Days don't matter. Points don't matter.
I mean, something matters, but time itself, quantifying a Monday versus another day. I mean, we do this all the time, week after week. It's interesting.
Yeah, until you die. You don't got to do it anymore.
It's the maze of life, man.
All right. It all ends at one place.
Bringing it back.
Yeah. Well, speaking of mazes, that's exactly what tonight's episode is on. And
don't say.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Just in case. Like sometimes I have hard time. Like I barely know how to read. So if I couldn't read that at the bottom, it's just better to restate it. Maybe not everybody reads English. Who knows? They might understand it, but not read it.
True. True.
But yeah, and it's going to be a really kind of, I guess, informal, casual talk. There's tons of show notes. I got stuck on a single article about the so-called learning maze, which ended up not being so much learning in the end, with this group of like 1950s avant-garde Marxist artists, because of course if they're avant-garde artists they have to be Marxist, and how they kind of devolved into political revolution, but the art was still kind of interesting, and the setup of this maze is kind of interesting, and we'll jump into that. But my first question is, what do you think of? Do you think of like The Shining and like mazes in films and representations? Do you think of the Minotaur? Do you think of like a corn maze, or do they have like mazes on Halloween, like haunted hay rides? Those sorts of
those corn mazes, good mention. I did my first corn maze a little while ago, and it was a little frightening. I think the first time I did it was at night, and they had like ghosts in the maze. Quite difficult, but I know, and The Shining is a good one. My first thought was I had a teacher that assigned us to do like a maze one time, I think, for like an assignment. And then I remember I used to love drawing mazes. And so I think about just like the booklets of mazes and then like drawing them. So that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah. And it's weird. Like, did you ever get picked on for that? I got picked on a bit for enjoying mazes. Like,
I didn't do that in like polite society. No.
Oh, wow. You're much better at polite society than me. La-di-da.
At the ripe age of 7.
Hey, that's where you learn manners and all that stuff, right? In traditional polite society.
Right. So polite.
What about you, Nick? What do you think
Yeah.
about when
Did you draw
Hmm.
mazes?
No, I didn't draw mazes. What are you
he
talking
wasn't
about?
he wasn't a nerd, okay?
Yeah, I'm not Ariadne from Inception. Like it's not like it's not something I'm doing. But no, I did mazes for sure when I was a kid. I remember. The trick is to always start at the end and then work your way to the beginning. Makes it
Oh,
a
it's
lot
just
easier.
cheating.
It is
It's
cheating,
cheating.
but that's the way to do it. um,
It's
uh,
not any easier though. I mean,
yeah,
because
it
you're
is.
still going to come across roadblocks going out.
But the funneling of possibilities tends to be less at the end than it is at the beginning. So
Oh,
at
you're
the
so
beginning,
sneaky.
you have more possibilities to make error. Yeah.
Or it's just a poorly designed maze.
Yeah, I mean, most kids' mazes on a Carl's Jr. menu are pretty poorly designed. So,
Yeah. They are. They were like,
yeah, they're
I
kids'
remember being
mazes.
insulted by the cereal box mazes. Like, you call this a maze?
It'd be so great though. Like if I was one of those maze architects and like I got to design one for like Carl's Jr., I would make it as hard as possible just to piss those kids
Yeah.
off.
There'll be like
Yeah.
a subreddit in 3 decades of all these grown-ups who were like, "Do you remember that one messed up Carl's Jr. maze? Yeah, what was up with that?" And like the whole thread, you know. Yeah, I thought I was like, yeah, I had like issues because of that. Simple, you know. Yeah.
I'd
They
like to
lost
get
trust
lost
in
in a
people.
hedge maze maybe once. That'd be fun.
Ooh, that would be fun. They have some like massive ones that go over acres of land.
Hmm.
They had
Yeah.
like
I
a
think it'd be fun, but I mean like I need like a thing in my hand at all times that I can press a button and be rescued because like I get
No, man, you
really
just
freaked
do it
out.
the Victorian way. You just if you die, you die. You
Yeah,
know,
it is.
that's the point of the maze. You
It's
know,
just like life,
yeah.
you know.
Ooh, speaking of
You die in the
reference.
maze, you die in real life.
Hmm.
Ooh, that's creepy. Well, but like, wasn't there a maze in Dracula?
I don't
Keanu
know.
Reeves movie.
Yeah, right.
No, I mean, it was a book, but I think there was a maze in the book. Like they were talking. So yeah, you're right. Like mazes go way back. Mike, what a
Oh.
great topic.
Yeah,
go
way
farther back.
way farther back than Dracula.
Well,
No,
yeah, but I
actually.
mean, well, yeah, because yeah, no, true.
So
but
that's where
weird.
like the etymology breaks down because the word maze doesn't come about until like Middle Ages. I think
What, corn?
13th, 14th century.
That's maïs.
I have to.
Maíz,
This
yes.
whole
The original word for
episode.
maze stems from maíz.
Corn? Oh my god, wait. So then like a corn maze? Is that
No,
like
I'm
maze
bullshitting
squared?
you. I'm sorry. Yeah, maze squared. Maíz squared, if you can't pronounce it.
Nice.
But no, it comes from like the 13th century, and it denotes a delirium or delusion, but it stems further back from the word labyrinth. So
Mhm.
labyrinth has kind of like one way in, one way out, and it's all windy. But there's typically no dead ends and no like you can trace your way out. Whereas a maze is filled with dead ends, can have multiple exits, can do all sorts of crazy stuff. And that's where like the slight delineation happens, but for the most part, everybody uses them interchangeably. Because like you have the ancient Greek labyrinth, the
Yeah,
big
that's
old
a really
minotaur in it.
Yeah. I always think of kind of labyrinths just probably because of the Minotaur is subterranean. But no, I mean, it's just, yeah, it could be anything. They're pretty much the same sort of concept.
That'd be great
So-
if that's the big difference. Mazes are just like just slightly above ground.
Yeah,
Ground
exactly. Yeah.
corn doesn't grow underground. So. Be here all night with my corn jokes.
Technically, it does. It has a root system, Ayla. Stop being ignorant.
Oh my god, that's so rude. from the gentleman who didn't draw mazes.
Yeah,
Rude.
I know.
But he does know his corn.
He doesn't
Yes,
know
I do.
his corn.
Yes, indeed.
Oh, sorry,
Um,
listeners. What are we talking about? Anyway, okay.
No, it's talking about mazes, just labyrinths and stuff. But
It's
what else
maïzes,
did-
guys. Stop.
yeah, maizes.
I mean, I do have to go back. That is interesting. I never thought that there would be like, I mean, yeah, like we do use labyrinth and maze interchangeably. And it's interesting that there's a distinction. You said the distinction is that a labyrinth is usually just one path in and out.
Yeah, like it winds in a bunch of different directions, but you can pretty much go on it as a straight shot, and you'll find the way out.
Hmm.
It just twists and turns. And
I hate
labyrinths can
scary
also
things.
be a bit more circular.
Huh.
Um, whereas a maze is typically done in a square fashion, so that you could break up the sections of the maze easier and start to architect it in a easier way.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Like Peace Labyrinth. It's probably called as such because it's usually a circle walking path, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you shouldn't never feel lost in a labyrinth. Whereas in a maze, the part of the design is to make the person feel lost and a little scared at times.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
Like so going back to like The Shining, or even Goblet of Fire, Harry Potter, the
Mhm.
one where Edward dies. Spoiler alert.
Mhm.
Both of them have mazes and they're both terrifying, right? But the maze in The Shining ends up being a little bit closer to well, I guess they are pretty close to both of them, to the archetypical notion of um, of it being like a descent to the underworld. Because
Mhm.
Jack goes into the maze and loses his mind. And a little fun side story is that on set they had in The Shining they had a maze constructed, and every day Kubrick would hand out a new path to the maze, or a new map to the maze. And Shelley Duvall and other actors and actresses would get lost routinely in the maze until somebody had to scream out Stanley, and apparently
Mhm.
you could hear Kubrick just laughing every time they got lost.
Sounds like a lot of fun to work with.
Yeah.
Hey, that would be great. Do you know how hyped I would be to get like lost on set in the maze?
I just see the producer like coming down, like, okay, wait, so we haven't filmed anything and everybody's in a maze and this has been going on. Like, where are my dollars going? What's going on?
Mhm.
How let's get some stuff going, guys.
Well, what do you think they're doing? They're getting those actors into the mood so that you can get the right shot.
Time is money. We need a labyrinth, not a maze.
Like
Come on, guys.
you need those like 4 hours of them getting lost to prep for the 8 to 12 hours of shooting that day.
I mean, that is true. There's nothing more frightening than being lost in like a hedge maze.
Yeah, especially
And
if it's
she
your
did a good
mind.
job. Yeah, right. Right. I know. I need to watch that movie again. It's been a minute. I did watch a documentary about the hotel that it was filmed in. I
There's
retained nothing from that documentary.
So what's really interesting about that hotel is that a lot of those shots don't make sense. And I rewatched it a few times recently and actually started to get like a like a weird physical sickness from it, because like my spatial awareness got so messed up that I just got sick. I felt like I was being like teleported through different places. And that was done on purpose. Like you'll notice patterns in the carpet change when shocks previously they were the same. And even that
Mm.
pattern is a little bit like a maze, the one where like where the ball rolls out to Danny, and like you see like the hexagonal thing with
Mhm.
little ball in the middle, also
Yeah.
maybe representing the maze as well. But that sort of symbology of that film runs heavy.
We
And
know that's intentional, right? That wasn't just like a screw up by the continuity person, because that happens too.
yeah, no, this was Kubrick doing Kubrick things.
Makes sense.
He has a like a very high sense of a high attention to detail. So that's what I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
And
All
so
right.
anything like that being done has to be done on purpose.
That's so
Mhm.
interesting.
Makes
I mean,
sense.
the man drew a map of a maze every day and gave it out to people, meaning that he had to reconfigure the maze every day before handing out the map.
Or you never changed the maze, but just drew different routes for people to walk through.
That's probably the more cost efficient way, right?
Yeah, just to screw with them.
But like even the Goblet of Fire, right, where you have again another hedge age, but where like Harry almost dies in it, I think, and then the one
Mhm.
kid like Edward dies in it.
Mhm.
So then like these descents down into the underworld, where either like you have two tails, always the person who makes it out, or in some Native American traditions there was the idea that wicked people cannot make it out of the maze. They were amazed, if you want to do that, and you get
Mhm.
stuck into this loop of madness pretty much
It's a nice
until
moment.
they die.
Yeah,
Amazing.
is that called the Indaloo? I forget what if it's called, but it's the
What
man
is it?
inside the maze.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
symbol.
Mhm.
The man in the main symbol. I forget the name
I
of
forget
it.
what the name is. Yeah.
But it might actually be in the show notes somewhere in there, or I might have only plucked the Hopi thing because I was a little bit more positive, or it gave back to like this death and rebirth thing too. Because there's also this notion that when you enter in the maze, you're sort of dying, which symbolizes all those different directions you could get lost in the beginning.
Hmm.
But once you reach the middle and you kind of find your way towards the exit, how that goes away less and less, and you find your way out. But the midpoint usually has this thing um, that Theseus got. So that original myth that we were talking about, the labyrinth and the Minotaur. After Theseus slays the Minotaur, he meets um, he meets the goddess. I'm gonna mess up. Who is that chick from Inception that you said?
Oh, Ariadne, the spider.
Ariadne, or
Hmm.
this Ariadne is the Greek goddess that gives him a thread to pull his way out of the maze, and we
Hmm.
call that now, or it was called then, a clue. So we get the word clue from,
Hmm.
Nice.
which is
That's
also
an
kind of cool.
interesting. Hmm.
But yeah, when you enter in the maze, you sort of die in a sense, and then you're reborn again, or you don't make it out at all.
Right. Yeah, you kind of like Schrodinger's maze there. It's like once you go into the maze, you're both alive and dead, and neither. You know, like, just becomes this weird quantum world where, yeah,
Yeah, and you
yeah,
there is an element of fear there. Like I wouldn't mind doing like a multi-acre maze, like one that takes like 6 or 7 hours to get through if you're perfect.
hmm
But I
yeah.
do kind of also like to induce fear in myself.
I mean, it would be really creepy. I mean, it would be great if you could find one like that big, and then like spend the weekend doing it. That would be pretty cool.
Have like supplies and
Just
stuff to
camp
get
in
you
it,
through it.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
Or you have
Oh
to
wow.
find the camp spot that's already in there.
Yeah.
Like
Or
at
you have
each
other
point.
things like haunting you. Like if like just make it like a Hunger Games mixed in with just like a giant maze.
Yeah,
Have like teams of people trying to
there
get
you go.
out.
That's fun.
Yeah, it'd be
I
great.
think they
That'd be
made a
fun.
movie called Maze Runner about this. To be honest.
But instead of having like weird alien creature or genetically modified creature things attacking you, it's just other people.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You know,
Fun.
evens out the
Walking Dead
odds a little
style.
bit.
Yeah.
I do want to do that like 5K where half of the runners are human and half the runners are zombies.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've heard about those. That would be fun. They have obstacle course like Tough Mudders that are like that too.
Mhm.
Stop. That sounds super fun.
They're doing. You have like 3 lives, I think, and then afterwards you become one of the zombies. And of course,
Oh,
the goal is to survive.
right, right,
Um,
right.
but no, so yeah, you have this whole archetype thing of descending into the underworld, and like in a weird way too, you can almost think of it like your personality, like because obviously we're getting into like Jungian space now. We're just talking about psychoanalytics and a little bit of like psychotherapy. So like the therapist in a way acts like I'm just Ariadne. I'm going to replace that word with the anima for men or animistic, sort of like within Jungian terms, that person that gives you the thread to kind of pull yourself together, or
Mhm.
is the
It's
physical.
the Virgil.
Yeah. The psychotherapist is more the Virgil trying to guide you towards your divine notion, I guess.
Mm.
But it's you still have to like surrender yourself and explore yourself like it was a maze. Like explore your darker tendencies, or try to get through repressed ideas and things like that to find a way out. So my thing is though, like if you're the maze runner and the maze, that means you're simultaneously building this maze of yourself and also pulling yourself through it.
Mm.
or
Yeah.
or is the thing that constructing the maze outside of you, like those interdimensional beings, those
Mm.
angels and demons, and we only perceive it as ourself because we have no idea what they actually are.
Man. I mean, I like the latter, but I think the former might be a little bit closer to reality. Um, I do, while you were saying that, I did get this like sort of image of like if you're trying to attain your highest self, whatever that may be. Um, Perhaps the maze runner is trying to get to that center point of the maze, which would be the highest self or the idealized version of whatever the end goal is. Um, but the maze constructor is the pathways that you take to get to that place, and that's your habits, your moods, your sort of dispositions, your inner turmoils, all of those things that kind of stymie the path. And so some people can just create a direct line to the center, while others have probably a much more winding maze to get to that end point. And it's really just kind of like, and I think you could probably take your time if you want to too. I mean, like you could probably complicate and uncomplicate the maze as much as you'd like. So,
Yeah, but what if? So unless you explored the whole thing, right? So there's two things. Like you do want to get halfway there, but you still also have to make it out without getting lost again, right?
mhm.
And all the time, you may not have a thread that gets you through it. But if you don't explore all of it, assuming that it's even possible, just I guess a second point, um, how do you know that you reach the true middle of your maze?
I mean, that's a good question too. I don't know how exactly you would know, because it's really like, if you could push your maze out into infinity if you really wanted to and never come to the center of the maze. Your entire life could just be the pursuit of navigating the maze and not getting to that thing. So it's like, is it the destination or is it the ride or is it a mixture of both? It's probably a mixture of both. But I don't know when you find out when the center is, to be honest. I think it's different for everybody. That's why I said it's like the ideal version of the whatever your end result is. Because I think, like, we thinking of like a maze and a grand narrative of the sum of somebody's life, but you can also be in, I want to lose 10 pounds, or I want to, any sort of goal that you set out to do can be its own little mini maze. And those little mini mazes make up the bigger maze of the, grand narrative of the sum of your life.
I like that. And when you start to analyze how to make mazes, you do want to break them down uh, into smaller and smaller mini mazes to the point where you have a like a tile, like a little like
Mm.
either 2x2 grid or a 1x1 grid. You want to try to like draw a path from like here from the bottom of your little square of your little tile up to the top,
Hmm.
and then that creates like the straight line, right?
Yeah.
And the mazes that are interesting though kind of have bends and twists and turns, sometimes have loops in them. So you can start to build from these very simple tiles more and more complex mazes that when you reconfigure them, you end up with like I believe the math is it's like a multi. If you take like a 2x2 grid of tiles and you come out with like say four interesting possibilities made up by your rules,
Hmm.
you end up with like a four multi-set combination, a combinatoric pattern of different things that you can of different mazes that you can make, and it ends up being like thousands of different patterns from these
Hmm.
four very basic sort of smaller tiles of like yeah these super basic mazes that are just straight lines or maybe a turn or something like that.
Right.
So I think you're right in the sense of setting up a goal. If your goal is to get out of the maze, and the maze is I want to lose 10 pounds, then you could kind of build your way through it,
Hmm.
and you can make it more complex by like adding cheat days or something like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
or
Or
having
changing your workout, or yeah. Hmm.
yeah those sorts of things to make it more interesting and you can get through it.
Yeah.
But what I find interesting about this theory, though, this sort of stuff with habits, the one thing that we didn't talk about was like visual stimuli. So your environment.
Hmm.
Do you think your environment can affect the way you perceive a maze?
Yeah, it
Like,
depends on how the maze looks, right? I mean, we were just talking about how we would love to be in like a big, grandiose European hedge maze, you know. But if the maze was like a whole bunch of garbage and post-apocalyptic, you know, dead bodies, you know, I think maybe you might not want to be in that maze,
it's like the back alleys of downtown LA.
right?
The train tracks in
We want
LA.
we want a posh
Yeah.
British manor hedge maze. That's what we want.
Yeah,
To be
some
clear.
Yeah.
some rich aesthetic hedge. Maybe.
Yes.
But,
Something Bruce Wayne's manor would have, you know.
I don't know. I do like the grid. I kind of want like the inner Gotham City alley maze.
Okay,
where
okay.
we have
That
to
was
be
pretty
careful.
cool in the movie with the one with what Rachel Dawes is played by Katie Holmes, and he's like just driving with her, and then she like swerves underground, and it's Gotham City, and it's subterranean, so it might qualify for maze
Yeah.
action or labyrinth action. Which one? Which one?
More. I mean, I consider Labyrinth subterranean. So maybe that, but yeah,
Either or,
either or.
as long as you don't feel lost in one, it's a labyrinth. Start to feel
Yeah.
lost.
Well, it's interesting. Well, I like that you said that because when Nick was answering your question earlier, I was thinking about the difference between labyrinth and maze. And if you were thinking about like the grander scheme of like life being a maze or navigating the world like it's a maze, then it seems to me that the labyrinth is more like, you know, it's all about the journey, not the destination, you know, like it's about the path.
Cool.
Right, versus like the maze, which is more about like meeting dead ends, so you are forced to have an inward confrontation to change somehow to progress to the next level. There's like a shaping or something, which I
But
think.
labyrinths have monsters.
Oh
So do mazes.
Yeah, so
no,
There's tell of Rocco's Basilisk.
right. Well, I just think it's interesting because like if you were to go, the labyrinth is like the peaceful route, and then the maze is the more challenging route or option or whatnot. It's interesting because then the maze can be perceived as like negative and just an endless thing of obstacles, or it could be perceived as like the thing that changes you. You know, like it is the journey, but it's also the destination because the destination signifies some sort of like transcendence or whatnot. Perhaps into yet another maze, as life is. But you know, like I think for the mazy person, you know, I think that that endpoint seems a little bit more significant than the labyrinth because the labyrinth it's assumed. It's like walking a path with faith and hope. Whereas the maze, you could go either the nihilistic route or you could go the more pragmatic route, I suppose, in the face of no certain end.
the labyrinths confirm there is no free will.
Yeah, it's a little more
Well,
deterministic.
It's all
It's kinda-
deterministic.
Except for the monsters.
Kind of like if you want it to be though, right? Like I guess you can kind of sculpt it because what you're talking about, Ayla, this maze idea, yeah, it's Jungian individuation, where like all of those dead ends they represent, or like, oh yeah, all those dead ends represent our shadow. All the monsters inside of it too, parts of the shadow, right? Parts you really don't want to meet. Whereas this labyrinth notion might be something like you keep everything very shallow. You ignore things, or like you just satiate the ego in a sense. If we want to keep free will going within our thing, um, you can also look at it in two different choices of life too, right? Like you can make the idea that this is I feel like this might fall apart, but like for example, um, finding a career, finding a job is closer to a labyrinth where things can kind of get expected, at least in the most ideal world. Whereas trying to start a business can be seen as a maze. You have to figure out all this stuff that, if you weren't trained to, if your parents didn't do it, then you may not know how to do it, and vice versa. Because there's a lot of nuance to just building a career that may make it more maze-like than we like to think. Um, but yeah, it's just that next step of nuance and wanting to bring it in or not.
Hmm. I can
But
see that.
I do like that notion of yeah, as far as finding yourself, or even like when we say finding the midpoint or finding your center, finding the center of the
Mhm.
maze, finding the center of yourself.
Yeah.
Um, you can view it like that. But with the labyrinth, you still have finding your center, but it's just a little bit
Less
uh,
pressure.
less, well, just less at stake. You're
Mm.
maybe the variables or the weight that you're playing with is just a little bit lighter than what the maze could bring on, and
Mm.
whether within your choices, right? If you never choose to break any rules, for example, then you can kind of say you're wandering the labyrinth. Versus if you start to break rules and you're trying to find your own path and things, then you're starting to explore the maze a little bit. That includes taboos, that includes worlds of yourself, and you can find yourself at face to face with a monster breaking down a wall in the maze that you weren't supposed to break down, which then
Mm.
changes the maze.
Well, and as you're talking, also, it makes me think about how mazes and labyrinths, they're puzzles in a lot of ways. I mean,
Mhm.
I know you have it distinguished as puzzles being more maze-like, but I mean, it's still like a challenge to our processing. Go down one path, hit dead end, turn around. Remember that you went right last time, so go left. So there's like a deductive reasoning that's sort of needed for these mazes and labyrinths. And I think it's interesting that it's something that we created, both in like physical form and in like I guess, paper art form mazes, but like to just think of it as like a weird manifestation of the way that our thinking can complicate stuff. You can take anything that's seemingly quote simple and you can think it to death. You can think about it in so many different ways that thinking itself becomes a labyrinth at times. And it's interesting that that's something that we then kind of like notated, in our history that this exists, that you can get trapped in these maybe mental mazes or just puzzles about the universe, the idea of wanting an endpoint and then accepting that there is a purpose to it, then you'll be changed, or knowing that it's always there and forging ahead anyway, like just it's just interesting. Especially like think about
Yeah.
like the human condition and suffering, like you can say suffering is a part of life and I choose acceptance. Or you can say suffering is a part of life, but I have a way to transcend it. And I think those are also some things that kind of like, I don't know, just come to mind when I think about the two different types.
Yeah, and what becomes interesting is that this goes back. This is one of those symbols that are prehistoric, and it goes all over the world, from Eastern cultures to Western cultures. Even like Egyptians had mazes in their pyramids to protect something, hide something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's it's one of those symbols that you can find anywhere, which means it's pretty much hardwired into what we are as a species. For
Yeah.
some reason, we get drawn into this labyrinth maze thing very easily.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, and it's funny because if our origins were hunter gatherer and we were perpetually in a maze, you would think that once we liberated ourselves, we wouldn't want anything to do with it. And yet we're like, oh, you know what would be fun? Let me make a maze. I mean, not like that, but you know what I mean? Like it's just interesting that it's not something that we run away from. It's something that we embrace and contend with and talk about and create from.
Look at our cities. Look at any grid-based city. It's pretty much a maze.
I mean,
Take you from
yeah,
point A to
and
point B.
but when you got Pico, Olympic, Wilshire, those streets that make it more of a cozy labyrinth, Yeah, I don't know. It's like it could go either way, man. It could go either.
Yeah, GPS helps out a lot. Let me
That's
tell
true.
you.
I just saw this video though. Somebody was, I think they were in Florida, and uh, they were on their way to like an appointment, already a little bit late, but the off ramp was closed for construction. And they were just yelling like, Apple Maps did me wrong. I know
Yeah.
everybody experiences that when it's like, oh, make a left turn, and it neglected to tell you that it's like 4 lanes in each direction, 50-mile-an-hour speed limit, and there's no red light. It's just a stop sign, and you're like, oh, damn it, I've been bamboozled over
Or
here.
the best one, where like I like when it's like make a right here, and it's like do not enter. I'm like, oh, well, I can't go that way.
Right. Right.
But that
Definitely
might
did.
be like very much simplifying the maze of. I mean, I could make a right. I mean, I could break that rule and go down the one-way road on the opposite direction, and
I've done that
maybe
before on
turn out okay.
accident and did not die. So
Is
do it.
there's a time in New Zealand where I pulled out of a parking spot and I went driving on the right side of the road, which is not the proper side of the road to drive on.
Oh no.
And I'm like, why are these headlights heading
no.
towards me?
That's the worst. Uh-oh.
And they stop and I stop and they kind of look at me. And I'm like, oh, this is the wrong country. Get on the left side of the road. And keep going.
See, yeah. No, I know. Well, that's like
But-
in was it I think it was Vietnam. They don't really have pedestrian walkways. So like you just like you have all these mopeds, they're nonstop. So when you observe, people who live there, they just start walking and the mopeds just go around you. And I remember like being really scared, and I just got off a bus, and I think I bought a baguette. And so I held the baguette in front of me to try to I don't know, like be my test person. So like the baguette would get hit, not me. Sure enough, like halfway across the street, the baguette gets taken out by somebody because I'm like sticking it way in front
Are
of
you
me.
sure someone just didn't want to steal your baguette?
No, it was like
Yeah.
legit on the floor, and it was like a hard like I'm sure their shoulder.
Did you
felt
knock
bad.
somebody out riding
No,
their bike?
they were
with a
okay.
baguette?
They were okay, but this old lady had to like hold my hand and like take me across the street. This is the first time I was so like I was petrified, like Simba with the wildebeest running at him. And
Oh yeah, some places can be terrifying, but that's the difference, right? Like we have these rules that make the maze of life a bit easier, right? From driving in orderly fashion, where we have stoplights, sides of the roads to drive on, lanes, versus the actual reality of the maze, where you can literally drive on any side of the street you want. There's no physical thing that's going to stop your car from driving on the wrong side of the road or driving down the wrong way on a one-way road. It's just a road, it's just pavement. But
Nick's thinking. What are you thinking, Nick? Look at those eyes. He's thinking.
but it's funny. I'm not just going to stare at him.
Yeah.
I know.
I'm mulling over what you guys are talking about, and I'm stuck on this labyrinth versus maze thing. And my question is, do you think that a labyrinth is just a maze over the finality of time? Like, so we're talking about this concept of a maze and a labyrinth. Labyrinths are distinct from mazes in that they end in the same place they started. So if we're talking about our life being more of a maze in our day-to-day actions, being able to take turns and twists and break rules and stuff like that, in the sum totality of our lifespan, we end at the same place we started. So is there a zoom out at some point when the maze actually becomes a labyrinth because you've exhausted all the possibilities and you've already set your determined path?
You can definitely view it like that.
Yeah, well, like my dad, I remember asking him as a kid, like what happens when you die. And he had the best answer that I'll never forget. He said, "We just go back to where you were before you were born."
Yeah.
In retrospect, like, come on, like that is not a sufficient answer, but it is because, right? Like, you go
Stuff
back.
still happens.
Yeah, and I remember being like scared to death, and he was like, "But do you remember what it was like before you were born?" And I was like, "No," and he's like, "Mustn't have been that scary." So it's
Good
pretty
old,
cool logic.
very cold statist logic.
So I'll give you a computer science answer.
Wait, is
Um,
the answer to what happens when we die, or Nick's Labyrinth versus May's question?
Nick's Labyrinth. Don't worry about what happens when you die.
Yeah.
You've already experienced
Why
it.
I will know. I
All
know.
right, you
I'm
already
just-
know what's there. Don't worry about it anymore. You're fine.
It's true. Yeah, no, it's pretty cool. I was thinking about it the other day. Like, well, and seriously, whenever I think about that, butterflies just pop up. I think I've like ripped open time space, but that's for another day.
Have you fallen in love with death? Because whenever I see like a really pretty girl I could fall in love with and get like visions of marriage, I get butterflies. So
Why
I'm
didn't
telling you,
get butterflies? I see them.
ketamine therapy is going to be the new veganism. I'm telling you right on the show right now, because it's going to be everybody who does ketamine therapy cannot stop telling you about their ketamine therapy.
So wait, so then does that make the DMT users like the carnivores?
Yeah,
And then the
definitely.
ketamine people, the
Yeah.
vegans?
Yeah, most certainly.
Cat.
Just fight back and forth.
Nah. Hey, Meatless Monday is the thing. You know, I like it. Wait. I had
Margarita Monday is also a thing too. It's very
meatless.
useful.
That's are margaritas
Margarita.
vegan? Yeah.
You had fish, Ayla. Stop acting like you're
I
meatless
just
today.
admitted that I didn't. No, I said it was a thing. I'm in favor. I mean, I'm in favor of reducing meat consumption. I do like salmon, but what for your
Anyways,
cholesterol in your heart?
Parts of the maze, I'm happy
nothing
that
wrong
I
with that.
avoid it.
Yeah.
No, but to answer Nick's question, so there's a lot of maze construction and maze traversal comes down to graph theory. The stuff, that general class of things that we were talking about when we went into automata theory, right? Just another branch of graph theory. And there's this notion that when you make mazes, you can set them up in a graph, kind of using it's called like a minimum spanning tree algorithm, where basically from a set of those little circles, those little nodes and lines, edges, you find a way to map all of them where all the nodes are touched once on one edge, and you build up this big old spanning tree out, and then you could build your maze around that. And the same thing is true for when you traverse it. You can find every node throughout the maze where it only touches once. So when you die, if you just looked at your life without all the dead ends where you went to and like all the things that kind of formed your core self, I guess, or like carried on throughout life. So, your behaviors, your hobbies, who you were at the end, and how they all kind of carried along forward without any of the dead ends, then I could see that being like the Labyrinth. You can get a snapshot of yourself at time's end, but you can also get the time shot of where things went bad, the hobbies that you picked up and dropped, the behaviors you picked up and dropped, and kind of see the full maze of your life,
Right.
that you explored, which is not the full maze of
not the full maze that exists in its totality. It's just it's interesting. I think determinism works best in retrospect, right? So it's like, you could look back at your maze and be like, well, that was the path that I was set to do no matter what. And so that is the totality of me,
You could think of it like there's like this notion that gets played around with destiny and fate too, because that's a test. A maze and a labyrinth is a test in destiny and fate, right? And fate, faith, and destiny.
But
Three favorite strippers. Anyways, sorry, I had to do it. But as long as you keep going, you're testing those things, and like if you make it through to the other side, you can say that it was always fate for me to make it through to the other side. It was always destiny that I would arrive there.
Right.
So putting on that determinism. So Isabella, sorry.
Oh no, I'm going to just complicate things because that's you for that maze. If there's like multiple versions of you, in which case you did the opposite of everything you did in this life and other lives, right? Then like the you, the egoistic you that is defined as you based on these like descriptors, right? Like blonde you, brown you, blue-eyed you, whatever, you know. I mean, I guess we're talking more about choices. So like construction you and engineer you, you know,
Visual.
all the different paths. It's
Visual
weird.
representation still matters.
Huh?
We'll get into that in a little bit, but visualizations or like visual presentation of not only you but your environment matters very much in mazes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it would have to if a maze is like a closed system where there's a dead end or a starting point that you loop back into or not or whatnot. I guess I'm just getting hung up on like the comparison to
Mazes,
reality.
so mazes can have multiple exits as well. You can relax rules within construction of the maze, right? For example, I can choose to smoke a pack of cigarettes every day, increasing my probability of um, getting lung cancer and dying that way. Or I can go down to the local gun store, get Kurt Cobain's microphone, and talk into it. Two different ways of dying, two different exits.
I
of the maze.
guess.
Wait, why would the microphone be at a gun store?
Oh, he was making a joke, Kayla. It's fine.
Kurt Cobain's microphone is a shotgun.
Yeah.
Spoke into it.
Not cool. Oh my god. I'm so
But to
sorry,
answer
Courtney
your
Love.
to touch on your question, Ayla, yes, there are infinite possibilities in which you don't make the same sort of decisions in your maze as like in other universes. But there's also an infinite number of mazes in which you did the same thing over and over again.
And they all fit within one grander maze. So like every
Yeah.
option you
But with
didn't
the
take
grander
is just a
maze,
smaller maze.
right? But would the grander quote maze actually be a labyrinth, depending on whether or not the world and the universe that we exist in is one way or the other?
No, if the universe retracts in on itself again and becomes a singularity, then yeah, the universe itself would be a labyrinth, right? Alice in Wonderland's a labyrinth, or she starts exactly at the same point that she ends at the same point she starts. Same thing with Dorothy
And The Alchemist.
Yeah, and Dante goes through the layers of hell into purgatory into heaven. I guess that's what you call it.
Paradise.
Paradiso.
Yeah, they're Paradiso. Yeah.
Well,
But he doesn't come.
But
out
he
of
doesn't
hell
come back. Yeah.
in the exact same spot though.
Right.
So
Mhm.
every entrance to a maze or a labyrinth is an exit. Just because you only have one that brings you back, you might get hung up a little bit on like physical location, right? If you walk into a labyrinth, do the thing, and then walk out the exact same spot, the entrance is an exit. But all entrances and exits in the maze are entrances and exits. There's all the same spot. They might be geographically different, but with viewing it from the perspective of a maze, they're all entrance and exits.
And everybody ends up in the same place anyway. So there you go. It's the same place that you started.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So we'll get into the visual aspects more, and I'm sure we'll circle back on this kind of stuff. But do you get into like I don't know, like knowledge cheats while in a maze?
What's the thread?
Well, because like the Higgs boson thing has been on my mind, and like the Higgs field, which like everybody predicted, but there was no way to have proof of it, which is what the Higgs boson proved when they observed it. But so I'm just curious because like if labyrinths and mazes are some sort of like love letter that humanity writes to the universe, then and it plays on the fact that we have cognitive abilities to deduce facts, from our reality. What then do we conclude when we are able to extract information beyond what is observable within the maze?
Ways to get around walls in the maze.
I was going to say,
without
yeah. I mean,
breaking
like,
them down
cheat?
without physical exertion. No. You can travel through the maze however you wish. If you have a teleportation device that gets you from one place to another, use it, but you may miss out on all the fun exploration part.
Right. Well, that's the thing I was gonna say is like when you look at the maze and you think about like dead ends, then it has defined boundaries. And I'm just curious about the merits of poking holes in those boundaries or staying within the confines of the maze as a
So
participant.
so there's you can I don't think you can actually really ever get out of this psychological maze we're talking about. I think you just find new parts to it. In my experience at least. And when you kind of cheat the maze in this way, you can think of it as so my experience with it is I did a thing that I morally did not want to do and had a biological reaction to it. So like I had some rule I set up for myself, a wall within the maze. I broke the wall down and I went through it
Mm-hmm.
and found a different, newer, bigger maze, but felt so biologically sick I went back and turned around and went back to yeah, I backtracked.
Hmm.
And sure I could have continued down that road, could have continued into the other part of the maze, but that's what I found on the other side of that. Now, if you can cheat the system and jump around, I don't think you'll ever truly get outside of it. Mazes become really interesting when you allow for things like rooms and big, vast, empty spaces, because then you can think that you got out of the maze, but surely you're going to find another wall again soon. So
Mm-hmm.
if you use this cheat device to jump around and teleport from different parts, you just find different parts of the maze, but you're
You
never
run into
truly do
invisible
it.
walls.
Yeah, the
Or
developers were
manifest in the
lazy.
middle of one.
Yeah. There used to
Yeah.
be games I used to play where like there would be a, invisible wall at the outer edge of the game map, but like there'd be a first wall which was like shorter. So if you knew how to exploit to get your character a little bit higher over that wall, it was like actually just like a fence almost. Then
Yep.
you could actually go farther than the wall, but it was only by a little bit, and then you ran into the wall again. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Those invisible walls were a bane, but much better than some of the things they have now, where you
Yeah,
just
so
fall
now
to
we
the
can't even
world.
see the walls.
Hey, I was playing Zelda the other day and I earned Rivale's grace or whatnot. And so I was in this labyrinth and I was able to just fly right out of it,
You're so happy,
just run across the
Mhm.
top, which actually
but you're
wasn't much of a help.
still in a bigger maze of the game world, a bigger labyrinth.
Mhm.
True, but also too the thing that I needed had to be obtained by going through a pathway that was on the bottom of the labyrinth. Like it wasn't a good cheat to get to the top, although it was interesting to see everything from like that bird's eye view. But yeah, no, it's interesting to think about the mazes both from a psychological perspective and then also like a space-time perspective.
It's a really interesting computation problem too. People get obsessed. Like you could procedurally make mazes. Um, there's quite a lot of documentation to that in like something like Unity or Unreal Engine, or if you like to make video games and stuff. It's one of the fun little projects you can do, and you learn some good graph algorithms and some interesting things like that. But going back to this notion of invisible walls, there's this famous quote by fucking somebody, I don't know, but there's two types of prisons. One where you can see the bars and you know you're in jail, and the other where you don't, where you think you're free or you feel like you're free at least, but your mind is being slowly warped into something that it's not, and you won't do certain things because you've been brainwashed.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And mazes are a lot of the same. There's two types of mazes. The mazes that we've and labyrinths. I'm using these words interchangeably. Um, the maze that you know you're in, whether it be a psychological maze or actual physical hedge maze, whatever you're trying to do. And there's the maze that kind of looks like the real world, that makes you think you're free, but in reality, you're still making decisions. You can think of it like life, I guess. But if you know this, when you construct mazes, you can construct something that looks like a real world, right? You can construct something that feels very real, but is not at all. It's actually designed for a certain reason. Think of this like the Truman Show.
Mhm.
The whole town he lives in, all of that is much more is a constructed maze for his reality, versus the real world and all these people watching him.
Mm.
And that's what these avant-garde artists did, called the Situationists, 1950s French avant-gardists who were kind of inspired by the behaviorists from psychology. They saw the rat running through the maze and all that, but they didn't like the way that the behaviorists were more interested in like raw data and numbers versus what's actually happening through that maze or through that
Mhm.
learning process. So what the Situationists did, this is like early proto stuff. They go on to devolve into like a political movement and focus much more on revolution. They did some interesting work with like worker revolts and things like that. But in the early days, they would construct mazes and put workers, their own people into those mazes to try to get you to follow them or try to get you to doubt yourself that you're going in the right direction. And they would set up visual environmental cues to kind of play with your mind a bit.
Mhm.
And what they were really interested in is the fact that mazes have this breaking down effect where they break you down from being a individual to someone just trying to get through the maze or the labyrinth, right? And this is in a weird individuation way how it works too, where you're breaking apart, you're exploring parts of yourself, you're exploring parts of this maze, and then as you leave those parts, you're leaving that stuff there to find the center, and then to find a way out, hopefully.
So
Um,
these guys, these fucks looked at a rat going through a maze for a piece of cheese and were like, man, well, they're on to something here. We got to extrapolate this up. We got to
yeah,
see how we can do. We can just jack this up because this can't stop at rats. Come on now.
this has to be a bit bigger than that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and they end up being inspired somehow too by the Canadian Defense Research, like their intelligence arm, because
Mm,
during the 50s, around the same time, I think they were doing research in boredom, and this stuff that just became recently declassified, like 15 years ago or so.
mm.
Which their research leads to a white room. Do you know what a white room is? White room torture.
Uh,
No.
no, is
So
that the opposite of like? I don't know. Yeah.
it's the worst. It's the worst torture I could imagine. So the whole room is painted white. You wear nothing but white. Your shoes are specially designed not to make any sound. Your lights never turn off. Everything you wear is white. The food that they give you is in a little white bowl, and it's just white rice. And they just leave you alone.
That's so messed up.
Nice.
So they have removed all sensory, because even naturally,
This is
when
your science, people. This is this is your science. Now, what did we glean from that? Honestly, like
how to
what positive thing can we glean from that?
how to change people's behavior without
Right.
physically getting involved,
How
without
to
hurting
how
them or doing
how to
anything.
destroy a human soul. Yeah.
It's
So
interesting that asylums often replicated some of that, right? Like the white walls, nurses wearing white.
I
yeah,
don't know.
some of
I
them
don't
try
know
to
if
do
that was
green
true.
too, though.
Yeah,
But
green was a big
some,
one.
well, there's like a wide range of them, right? The worst ones, I'm sure, uh, like where you have all your famous nurse ratchets, were probably awful to be in. I mean, we have video footage of people like sleeping in halls and like defecating on floors. No one ever cleans it up in the worst cases. So I'm sure some of those torture techniques were inadvertently being used, which just drove those people crazier. And
Mhm.
then in like really nice sanitariums, you would have, the green walls, the pleasant music, the
Hmm.
better care. So like money. Money's like your his boson of these mazes. Money
Yeah.
can make you just
True.
Probably, yeah.
teleport everywhere.
Yeah. You can buy a
Uh,
jetpack and just get out.
yeah.
Well, and what's interesting though is that I like the Higgs boson mostly because it led to confirm the suspicions of the Higgs field. So
Yeah.
it's not so much about the money, it's about the field or the teleportation. It's about the field, the Anyway, I'm gonna do an episode
And then
about
the
this.
bigger
I still
field
have a lot
theory
to
where they're
learn.
trying to connect the two, they're trying to bridge classical and quantum. So for every one particle, there has to be another particle that represents the other side. And they have like a bunch of different fields that will connect together.
Somewhat. I
That,
have.
or were
I
you just interested in the methodology that this thing exists?
I'm
And
not sure yet. I'm still piggybacking off of the synchronicity episode that I feel could be 10. And I also just want to learn about it because I remember people calling it the God particle, and I was like, oh, cool. And like that was years ago, and I was like, I don't know what that means. And so I definitely want to learn a bit more about it because there's something there and it's very interesting. And the more you dive into it, the more complicated it gets. But going back to this,
yeah, you
it's
got to make a left or a right somewhere. You got either got to study the theory behind it or the methodology and how they found it, or maybe both.
yeah, or philosophical implications thereof, which is probably the route I'll
So
go.
I think you might get a little disappointed in that. But that name, if I remember correctly, was more hype than anything.
The Higgs particle.
Yeah, being
Well,
able to
yeah,
It's just
there
dark
was
energy, guys. Why are we so upset? I
because it
don't
was
know
called the
why
God particle. It has the word
God
God in it.
particle. Yeah,
no, I
it
know
just
it
proved
was
that dark
hype.
energy exists, which is very like confusing because then what the fuck is that? But then also they
thing is,
called it the God particle because maybe we just took a piece of God when we turned that accelerator on. It's like,
Look,
what the
scientists
fuck,
need
dude? You
to
just
name
took a
this
piece of
stuff.
God.
They need to name this stuff cool things, all right? Otherwise,
Yeah,
they're not going to get funding.
that's
all
right.
well,
right?
That's
now
right.
here's the thing. Did you know that there's like 55 particle accelerators all over the world, and each of them is like 17 miles wide?
Yeah,
This
they
is
have to be that big.
yeah. Well, I know it's big, but I didn't know there was
Did you
55
want
of them.
somebody to ask you for permission to science? Nobody's going to
Yeah.
ask you. Well, I just talked about sticking individuals in a completely white room and torturing them for years for the
Nah,
sake of fun for the most part. And you're like,
well,
why don't I get permission to build this God particle accelerator thing?
yeah. No, I know. Nick and I were talking
Yeah,
about
they're like,
ethics.
okay, we have these two basic fundamental pieces of reality. What happens when we smash them together? We're just boys with our micro machines and Tonka trucks. It's like we just extrapolated that to particles. What would happen if we smash them together, guys? Let's find out.
All of the brilliance of science. That's what it is, really.
Yeah.
So, but these situationists, though, kind of pulling it back to all of this, which their postulation, like before it all fell apart, was that you could effectively change somebody's environment to make them behave differently, and that things like culture war and like future fights are all over people's like minds are all built within this sort of notion.
Mhm.
Right? So if you can prove it through a maze and you can make the experience of traveling through a maze hellish, then you can start to break people down. Once you've broken people down, then build them up the way you want by bringing them out of the maze in a certain way.
And that's
You
how you
kinda
get
see
New
that.
York City.
No, right? Like,
Yeah. Well, I mean, and if you want to go into the crazy, because Ayla's just took a step out, so I'm going to go really crazy right now. So, what if the city planners decided that this was the best way for a compliant society was to design cities in a sort of maze-like way?
yeah. The thing is, like their ideas they're really interested in social control and how to use art to manipulate that. Just like,
Right.
yeah. The scary thing though is that this ends up because cities were founded way before that. Like they were built on grids before this stuff was sort of known. That
Right.
means we've always had this weird need to control everything, even each other within our own environment, by the way that we individually want to.
Yeah. Even the movement of others. Yeah.
Yeah. And this gets next when you start to compare it to like the rat utopian experiments, where these scientists gave these rats everything, built up a little artificial city, and by like the 23rd universe or the 23rd like rat city, they've completely degraded into pathological behaviors. Where, like you had a few of the alpha males breeding with all of the females. You had the prettiest rats just cleaning themselves. You had all of the rest of the males either like fighting to death becoming
Or having sex to
homosexual.
death with each other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or eating themselves to death, and then
Yeah.
like mothers completely forgot their motherly instincts and would
Hmm.
just stop feeding their children. Or just you just saw a society break down completely.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
uh, I think this happens. I think that was like done in the 70s. I wonder what the situations think about that because
Well, then you think about like new city planning, smart cities. Well,
oh yeah,
smart cities that give us everything we want, right? We'll have our little feeders, we'll have our little, our
it's
pleasure
not
bots.
it's not gonna work. It's just gonna drive people pathological. That's
Right.
not
Said
like
pleasure bots.
Yeah.
people need that sort of chaos. They need the maze. They don't
Yeah.
want they we think we want a labyrinth. We think we want the easy path, but we
Well, sometimes you got
don't.
to hit a dead end. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
you need a little bit of obstacles. Have you ever heard about the speaking of smart cities, the cities that Disney try to govern? They made like three cities.
Yeah. Yeah.
Annabelle?
Yeah. There
No.
was one,
No,
I think it was like, you
you
had to
went out
be,
of real
oh,
mind.
so they used to do like corporate cities, right? They used to do like company cities. Like Ford,
Yeah.
I think, did that, where it was like
Well,
the town where Ford's warehouse was, they owned the entire city.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
how some cities started. But this was like most modernly, this was like Disney, but it wasn't like if you worked for Disney, you got to move in there. It was
Right.
meant for a general public.
Right.
And they owned all the water, they owned all the utility, they owned all everything. If you had a problem with it, you called Disney and they would come and fix it. The
Hmm.
town fell apart within 5 years.
Yeah, of course it did.
Like the properties all sucked. The services to get things fixed fell apart. I think one or two were in Florida, and I forgot the other one was. Um, but it was like a
Yeah.
complete fail, and they scrapped the projects.
Yeah. I think they were called Disney villages. I
Oh,
think that's what they were called, like Disney villages or something like that. But yeah, well, I mean, that's the problem with central planning, right? You provide everything with that, somebody with everything. Then, yeah, why even participate in the maze in the first place if you don't even have to navigate it? You're just being
yeah.
taken along for a ride.
That's the fear of the labyrinth, right? You run into
Mhm.
that monster
Yeah,
versus this.
that'll take you.
Yeah, and it's not like the unless you're Theseus. If you're Theseus and you have a goddess next to you, you're fine.
Mhm.
But yeah, you can run into these monsters that are a creation of the lab, sometimes external force that was dropped in there. Versus mazes like cities, you can run into monsters, but they're more. I feel like they're more natural. They're more organic. They're I don't know if they're probably the same origin, but no, I feel like they're more naturally driven than the monsters within the labyrinth. If we're
Mhm.
comparing realities here, right? Like
Yeah, the
so
labyrinthine monsters almost feel like psychological.
oh yeah,
And
exposed.
like it's like within the hero itself. Like the Minotaur is the shadow self of Theseus. You know.
But I think it's the beast that hides in the shadow.
Hmm.
Because maybe in the labyrinth itself, if we're talking about just labyrinths, then yeah, it's the shadow. Whereas if we're talking about mazes and we're delineating
It's
the
the
two, then
chaos.
it's like the monster within the shadow. It's that last thing you have to beat before finding your anima or animus. It's
Hmm.
like that the
The
ultimate.
chaos of uncertainty versus the sort of like the I don't know the predictable. Yeah, the
Well, I mean,
predictable
like,
labyrinth monster.
yeah, but even more so, like the the chaotic thing that you really, really, really don't want to happen, or like not like that's the worst unpredictable thing, like the nuclear war, the extinction event of things within your mind happening. That's that monster, or who you can become, right? If you
Hmm.
have something in your mind that you're like, I'll never become a murderer, and then you run through your maze, and then you end up in a situation where you have to murder somebody. Then that monster, like, what do you do in that moment? Do you succumb to it and murder it, or do you get over it and find
Hmm.
another way out around it? Is that the thing? Like it's yeah, that worst unpredictable moment within that chaos, and
Hmm.
that's that monster in the maze.
Definitely.
But it's like this psychological framing. But yeah, like these situationists, the monster within the hero, all of that. If you can visually construct it though as a maze maker, so like if say I'm building mazes for you two, building mazes out of your reality, and you don't know it, and I'm like, I think it's some time to make these two move out into a different place, and then for example, like an apartment, a really small apartment. You have to navigate those waters then of deciding what's in the apartment, and I'm able to like feed to you this notion through like Zillow algorithms or something to pick this certain apartment in this certain neighborhood. And then all the people around you, your neighbors that live there, I've also decided are going to live around you. And then they start doing weird events, or like they start not just doing events, not even weird events. You can like, let's say you want to, through Facebook neighbors or something like that. You want to become part of the community. But then you find out the community is doing really strange things. But if you're not part of that community, then you're ostracized.
Right.
Now I've got you to come a little bit further to my side as the constructor of this weird, crazy maze and to do things that you wouldn't do. And I think with today's technology and all of our connectedness, this is where something like that can actually happen. Where if, there's a story about the intelligence agency like following this guy, and literally everyone around him within 10 blocks that he ran into or met was an intelligence agent.
Yeah.
If you if you have that many
Hyper
people
reality.
working it, yeah, a hyper reality of sorts, but adjusting it to where you leave the maze where I want you to leave. Now you've changed your behaviors and ways.
Yeah. Yeah, you're guiding again, like we talked about the streets and city planning. You're guiding the movement of another individual and towards a destination that you've already determined.
But even worse, you're guiding, their psychology. You're guiding away who they're going to be, which is subversion on the umpteenth level. If you can subvert an individual, you can subvert a collective.
Certainly.
And that's where the next thing becomes really interesting. Where like if these mazes are all psychological and you're building them for yourself, can you start to build these mini mazes where you have a set of behaviors that you show to one person and then a completely different set of behaviors that you show to another person, and then get them to run through your maze and start to create characters. Like if you consider certain behaviors like paths through a maze or walls around the maze, like say I'm constructing a character where I'm vegan. So and then I show another vegan that I only eat vegan food, and these are my favorite vegan things. In that person's mind, I am a vegan, and now we've become, or we have something in common. But is that actually me? Is that not? Is that character who I am? Like how do these mazes interact together? How we alter them for constructing them, getting people to run through them.
Yeah. Well, then you get into like the concept of where these mazes meet, and is there a threshold between mazes too? Then you have like this idea of like, okay, what is that threshold between mazes? Maybe it's you as the through line between the mazes, so that it's hard to say, because if you're constructing say you're constructing a sort of persona to go through a subset maze, who's to say that you can probably, like, why can't you just extrapolate that out? I think it's probably because the more you do that, the less you'll be able to find yourself again. Maybe you're branching too far away from yourself when you do that too much, and then it becomes increasingly difficult to find your center again, or the true you, or whatever. But that's as far as I can get with that, because it's kind of a, like,
I think
who walks between the mazes?
Yeah. Who constructs the mazes?
Who constructs them? Yeah.
Who walks between them, pulls them together?
Right.
I think though you're getting close to this notion of locality too, which I find really interesting. Going is computer science stuff where like you can find this machine learning stuff, local minimums and local maximums. And you can find global minimums and global maximums where like for all the numbers, this is the smallest number. But if you kept traveling down a little bit further, you find even smaller number. So this is your geez, this is your true minimum. This is sort of like your local minimum. So you might find within this persona this local center. And so you exit out of it going back to the maze of you, but you can't find this global center of yourself.
Right.
And it's easier through patterns of behavior to return back to this. So for example, like if I hung out with that vegan all the time, every day, 16 hours a day, and all I did was eat vegan food for years on time. Aren't I a
Basically just
vegan now?
become you just become the thing. Yeah.
And so it's like, but over the course of your life though, right? Like I might hang out with the same person for 20 years, but then something happens where we don't see each other anymore. Then that whole persona that might become the new center. Or if you travel back to the self, like if the self is this ever endearing thing, then 20 years and 5 minutes later, I'm at Fatburger getting a giant, a quadruple XL, whatever the biggest one is, like the challenge one.
Yeah.
It's like 4 pounds of burger.
That's your local high or
Yeah.
max.
No, it's my global high. It's
True,
the true
actually.
self in there. That kid just going crazy with some chili fries. Oh, that's the thing. Like when you construct these personas and you get lost in it, I think you're right. It's easier to keep traveling back to that point because it becomes familiar. It's the paths that we know.
Yeah.
But that may not be your true center self.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and so then it makes sense that you would want to, if Ariadne gives you the silk, you would want to stake that silk in the center of yourself. So that way, whenever you explore your maze, you can go as far as you want, but you can always come back.
Yes, and hope that your hope your silk doesn't cross over itself.
Yeah. Don't cross
Or if
streams.
it does start to go crazy, if you just oh look, there's a shortcut here. I think if I go this way.
Yeah, and then you become a spider.
I know. I think it. Though I find this stuff fascinating. Like I do think that we as people are mazes in your conscious. Like I think any human is capable of pretty much anything, but your conscious travels through these mazes and you get kind of a biological feedbacks when you've gone too far. And you can choose to ignore it or you can choose to keep going, but it definitely is a strong teller of like, all right, I'm going a little bit too far in this one maze. I should come back a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Or you hit the walls of your biology, and that's a dead end.
Yeah, it's a much more difficult dead end to get around. But
Yeah,
sure. There's people that try to do it though.
Yes, they do.
But we are like this sort of stuff is known as psychogeography, and we've been playing with these ideas quite a bit, like how to design a city to get people to do certain stuff, like how to controlling the movement of people. This is sort of the notion that those situationists were really interested in. I guess I can read this. On the summer of 53. So this gets described as a charmingly vague notion and emphasizes the importance of practice in psychogeographic explorations. There's a first published discussion of it came out in like 1954 that included a psychogeographical game of the week. So they were really interested in doing this stuff in cities. And so this is, I guess, one of the games. Depending on what you're after, choose an area. A more or less populous city, a more or less lively street. Build a house, furnish it. Make the most of its decoration and surroundings. Choose the season and the time. Gather together the right people, the best records and drinks. Lighting and conversation must, of course, be appropriate, along with the weather and your memories. If your calculations are correct, you'll find the outcome satisfying. Please inform the editors of the results. So, like it's like constructing like your
hippie commune.
Yeah, right. Next yours. Just go straight for the hippie commune. But now it's like you live your life like it's a a Hollywood set. Like you're
Mm.
constantly like trying to make a movie set out of everything. That
Yeah.
hyper reality,
Mm.
and that's like the tile of these mazes, of real world mazes that you can make to build out into a bigger maze that is your persona or your ego or you overall.
Well, and that gets into a really tough, sort of concept too. Is like, what if you find if what if you realize that the maze you're in is just an illusion and you're not actually in your own maze? How do you get out of that? How do you get out of the illusory maze? Because I think that a lot of this sort of symbolism around the mythology and stuff, it's like the maze hides something. It's hiding something in mythology always. And so, it's, and like you were saying, set and setting environment, all of that stuff, plays a role on us psychologically. So yeah, what do you do when you find that the maze that you've been calling your maze is a construct that somebody else created?
I think a lot of that is growing up,
Mm,
because like as you become an adult, you realize that a lot of this, either the stuff that your parents told you was BS, whether it be good or bad, like around a certain time of the year sort of thing,
mm,
or like the things that they did were actually can be construed as not good, or like what was it, even the simple one, do as I say and not as I do,
right. Yeah.
right? Like that sort of stuff. So it's like you're put into this maze as a child and you're given the illusion of it, and as you get older, you start to break out of it slowly and find yourself. So that can
Mm,
be true for even as an adult. Like there could be somebody in the background who, if they're interested enough, can be shadowy and kind of uh, manipulate your life, construct that maze for you. The important thing is you need to put on your little detective hat or your spy glasses, I don't know, your spy gear, and start to figure out where the illusions lie. And
mhm.
maybe you can push back at them, or you just do it. But if it's a very shocking, jarring thing, then that can break your psyche as well.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, and who's to say you'll be able to remove the scale from your eyes anyways? Like what if we're calling our own mazes is just another illusion, right? Then you get into
Yeah,
this hyper reality, simulation theory, all of that stuff. And even just social engineering. Social engineering can be a maze for people that substitutes their own personal experiential maze, and it's one that they live and die in, you
yeah.
know, and phew, that's
It's a
rough.
it becomes so like me a lot of pathfinding algorithms through mazes are recursive. They
Mm,
recur. It's a function that just calls itself over and over. And it's like once you break through one illusion, there's no guarantee that you're not just in a different illusion or an
right.
illusion that accounts for breaking out of it. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, like another example my brain jumped to is there's been times in my life where I've had stalkers, and these stalkers would get people to befriend me to get information to rely back to that stalker.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, it's like, well, are you not really my? What are we doing here? You're my friend? Are you not? Like,
Right.
oh no, no,
Yeah.
this is just a fake reality that somebody's putting up. So you have to start to even like friendships or choices within mazes, right? My
Hmm.
maze is interacting with your maze, or my maze runner is talking to your maze runner,
Hmm.
and that either like you cut those mazes off, you build that wall back up, or you keep moving. Oh yeah, the reconfigurable mazes. So yeah, like personality. So as these mazes interact and kind of build bigger mazes that are societies and civilizations or whatever, um, you can reconfigure them just like you could reconfigure yourself at any time.
Mm.
And through reconfiguring, you can kind of cut off these illusionary realities. But you'll always, if you're going through your maze, you'll always see that wall. Or if you're sentimental, you can put something on the wall. I don't know, fucking a painting or something. You're like, hey, yeah, that used to be an open way to that other
Yeah.
part of the maze.
Right.
Those are fucking awful times. Time to go this way. And no, like yeah, that can be a jarring experience if you find out that your reality is an illusion.
Mm.
set up by somebody else.
I think it gets more illusory as far. I mean, like I keep going back to the center of the maze sort of thing, but it would seem to me that the closer you are to your own authentic maze, the less illusory it gets. And the more farther away from your own authentic maze you get, the more illusory it gets. So it's weird that there's this sort of like breathing pattern to it, where you would think that, the maze itself almost acts like in the man in the maze, he constructs a maze around himself to protect himself from things. But it's also a maze is something that you have to dive into to be, to confront danger and obstacle. So it's like it has this like dualistic sort of qualia to it that I find really fascinating. It's both a haven and your inferno.
Yes, and especially if you're the one running through it constantly. Like, yeah, because that man in the maze constructing it is definitely meant to protect itself, and even a bigger use of mazes is to protect something, right? Like,
Right.
That's what I mean by having people run through your maze and using these personas as ways to protect some part of yourself that you are find endeared to yourself, whether that be your true center. You stuff that at the end of the maze for the person to get through or whatever, or some part of you that you don't want to go or you don't want to be made vulnerable. So yeah, it's definitely you're protecting yourself, but you're protecting that center, and you have to build those infernos out around you to protect the center, because you want.
You almost have to be surrounded by danger in order to be safe.
Yes.
But it comes back to all the symbolism, right? The eye of the storm, it's being the oasis, the watering hole in the middle of the desert. It's that divine relief from the chaos,
Yeah.
And I guess that's what we kind of construct within ourselves, is this divine relief from the chaotic world that we live in, the suffering, the illusion, all of that.
Yeah, and that's how we interact with others, right? Like, ideally, it's a very easy labyrinth-like thing where you might meet one or two of their monsters, or they might meet one or two of your monsters, but they get through it, and there's a thing pulling along. Or if it's like an enemy, then you construct it very much like a maze, where you don't want the person ever finding that center of you.
And then you employ the monsters to protect you.
Yeah. That dualistic sort of thing. But yeah, that symbolism, like death and rebirth within ourselves, that individuation, that finding yourself, that center, that the Jungian archetypes like a whole, that even he had trouble talking about labyrinths and talking about mazes, because to him these are like stuff from his letters. It was so dense, just the symbol of it and all the different places it occurs, that he felt like I think it's like, I have it in the notes, I don't know if I have a date, but he felt like he couldn't say anything about it without pretty much sounding stupid.
Yeah.
And if Jung is worried about that,
yeah, then you got a problem, because it's one of the symbols that has actually probably too much meaning layered on top of it, I think, which is interesting, because that is one of the symbols that probably would have that much meaning layered on top of it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So he goes, topological study, because in most cases, however, the topology of the unconscious mind is not expressed in the concentrated form of the labyrinth, but in its false tricks, deceptions, and perils of an underworld journey. Complex of motifs is a labyrinth in itself, an indescribable tangle of problems. And I fear that my thoughts about it, although been going on for years, have still not gotten to the point where I could feel I could trust myself to say anything responsible.
God damn, man. Here on me being a jackass here. I took like 10 minutes to think about it. Like spouting at the mouth. Jung's like, I've thought about this problem for 20 years.
And like, irresponsible.
And there's nothing I can say about it.
I've studied all these dreams. I've studied all the different symbols from all the cultures.
Right.
But in a way, this has to be talked about in some sense of manner, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
especially on the show where we do this kind of stuff. And this has been like an odd intuitive fascination of mine for a long time. And I've thought about, I mean, hell, I've even constructed personas and given that to people and presented it as myself. So I've constructed these mazes in ways, and um, there's a recurring psychological experiment is trying to get back to like that minimum spanning tree of my own maze and how it connects with other minimum spanning trees of other people's mazes. Whether they're aware of it or I'm aware of it or not, we're always doing this. We're always constructing some form, like job interviews. Put your best foot forward.
Right.
You don't exactly show your true self in that. When you go out on a date, you don't show your true self.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you show the best
Social
parts
contract theory, all of that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's those mazes, those mini mazes interacting, and if you get lost in your own maze, you end up like Jack in The Shining.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
The maze is all the way down.
the crazy things that in the beginning of that movie, you don't even see the maze. It's not there in the
Right.
in the establishing shots of the hotel, and then it just pops up out of nowhere.
Yeah, because it's a spooky hotel, man. It's got to do stuff like that.
Oh man. But yeah, no. I think for this episode, this is something I could dive into. Like, I kind of wanted to go into the math side of it a bit more, but it becomes a little dense. Like, I would have to sit here. We would have to talk about factorials. We would have to talk about combinations as a math concept, multi-set.
I think you could probably
combinations.
squeeze 2 more episodes out of this, even if you did the math stuff and then the mythology stuff, because we didn't really touch on all of the myths that surround labyrinths and mazes too.
And all you had to say was factorial, and I was like, I'm gonna need a snack and a nap before I can get to that.
If they had to name the thing the God particle to get funding, how do you think I got to make this sound interesting?
Yeah.
But no, at least like the one big one that we didn't go. Well, we touched on it a lot was Theseus and the Minotaur, and how this. I mean, that becomes a somewhat interesting myth, but the symbols behind it are more interesting.
Yeah.
Which we touched upon on this, but we can definitely do an episode on the myth. I don't know about the math stuff. I don't know if this is the right form for it, but if I can make it interesting, I'll fucking try.
Myth and math and mazes. There you go.
Oh my.
That's your alliteration for you.
There it is. Perfect.
Also, thanks for bringing up the situationists. What an interesting, I just did a Google image search for situationist art.
Oh yeah, they're like
Sounds
like
Dadaist and surrealists. They get really intriguing.
They do. And what was funny is one of them talked about how, when we recognize that play is more important, we'll drop the meaninglessness of our lives and give in to joy or pleasure or something. And I saw that earlier when I was looking at the images. And then when you talked about Jack Nicholson in The Shining, and what does he say? He says all work and no play. And right. And so it's just interesting because it's what
That's how
was
those
the
commies
influence there?
get you.
Oh yeah. Oh Nick.
They get you
Nick.
with playtime, and then it's straight to the gulags for you.
So I could give a brief little thing on 2 paragraphs, and then we could call it. So the Situationist International (SI) was an international organization of social revolutionaries made up of avant-garde artists, intellectuals, and political theorists. It's prominent in Europe from its formation in 1957 to its dissolution in 1972. The intellectual foundations of the movement were derived primarily from libertarian Marxism and the avant-garde art movements of the early 20th century, particularly Dada and Surrealism. Overall, a situationist theory represented an attempt to synthesize this diverse field of theoretical disciplines into a modern and comprehensive critique of mid 20th century advanced capitalism. Because, of course,
Of course.
essential to the situationist theory was the concept of the spectacle, a unified critique of advanced capitalism, of which a primary concern was the progressively increasing tendency towards expression and mediation of social relations through objects. The situationists believed that the shift from the individual expression through directly lived experiences or the first-hand fulfillment of authentic desires to individual expression by proxy, the exchange or consumption of commodities, or passive secondhand alienation, inflicted significant and far-reaching damage to the quality of human life for both individuals and society. Another
These
important
kids just
concept.
did not get birthday gifts, did they? It's just a bunch of kids that got shitty birthday presents. They're like, fuck this capitalist society.
I want nice things, damn it. Another important concept of the theory was the primary means of counteracting the spectacle, the construction of situations, moments of life deliberately constructed for the purpose of reawakening or pursuing authentic desires, expressing the feeling of life and adventure, and the liberation of everyday life.
They are like the first prank bros.
Yeah, a little bit. Only like trying to do it pranks. In earnest.
They're like the first. They're like the original Just for Laughs.
Oh my god, I haven't heard that show in a long time.
I know, right?
Yeah, except they were like Candid Camera and how old that is.
Man, they got the best pranks though. Just for Laughs.
Yeah,
I can't believe the things they do. Yeah, so wholesome.
Yeah, that's it. It's it on mazes and situationist and constructing realities, and remember, kids, all of your life is an illusion.
It reminds me of Parks and Rec, the Reasonableists, which was like a doomsday cult. And they're like, why are they called a reasonableist? Because then it makes you sound unreasonable if you question them.
And it's funny because their doom days kept like, there wasn't any doom. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so then he's like with the Parks and City representative lady, Leslie Knope, and he's like, okay, I think the world's going to end June 16, 2027. And she's like, oh, we're booked that day. And he goes, oh, I was wrong. It was the 18th. Yeah. And then she's like, that's book 2. And he's like, 19? And she like nods. And he's like, it was
the 19th. Gotta love millenarianism. All right. Well, thanks, man. This was a fun conversation. Mm-hmm. Lots of rich brain noodles and food for you. So I hope that you guys enjoyed. Thank you, Mike, for bringing this topic to Exofathom tonight. It was a very fun one. Mm-hmm. And a lot of fun with this one. Yeah.
Thanks for chatting about it. I feel a little less crazy every time I bring
there you go.
Weird ideas like this out.
You know what? Ditto.
Not crazy at all. Yeah. Definitely not.
I'm gonna send you a stamp. Not crazy. Remember that's what Homer got when he went to he was like committed, and then when they checked him out, there was like a little stamp, and it was like sane.
Yeah.
Well, not crazy and sane are two different things.
Yeah. True.
I'll take the not crazy though.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. We very much appreciate you. Hope that you have a wonderful evening, or whenever you are listening to this. Leave us a comment. What do you think about what do you think about this this discussion? Do you have any comments? Do you have any ideas? Leave us some feedback. We very much appreciate it. Give us a thumbs up and maybe a subscription to our YouTube page at Exofathom. We very much appreciate you. We're also on the audio for Verbal, and we have Rumble and Odyssey as well. So you can check us there at Exofathom. And next week is Mine. We're going to be talking about luck, which is another one of these topics that'll be like a 28 pager, but I'll try to be more specific with it, because you can get really general with the concept of luck. So we'll see where we go, but stay tuned for next Monday at 8 p.m. We are here Mondays at 8 p.m. for you on Exofathom on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you very much, and until next time, Cognauts, you stay out there, and we'll catch you on the next Exofathom. Good night.
Peace.
Later.